Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
Cruising your way on this episode of Off 90. One of the oldest flour mills in southeast Minnesota. An artist who uses a unique canvas. Discover cheese from an unexpected source. And a look inside a decorative church. It's all just ahead, Off 90. Hi, I'm Barbara Keith. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Off 90. Nestled in the cool shadows of the bluffs just upstream from the mighty Mississippi is Pickwick, a sleepy little town where Thomas Grant and Wilson Davis built a grand flour mill in 1856. Today's residents are restoring this landmark and discovering the golden age of milling in southeastern Minnesota.
The Pickwick actually got started because of this mill. The two gentlemen come up from Ohio and staked a claim on the land and built a cabin so they'd have shelter, and then that was 1854, and then that fall when it got cold they went back to Ohio. And then the next spring, 1855, they came back and they brought 5 more families with them so they'd have help to put this up. They actually built a sawmill here first. The two wives that came up here, the one had read the Dickens papers, and she liked that, and that's how she happened to name the town of Pickwick, was because it was in the Dickens papers. Well, I'm Vic Gardner, and I've been with the Pickwick Mill here for about the last 16 years. When they came up here and seen that the stream was here and it had a good drop on the land here so they could put in their dam. And it's a spring-fed stream about 4 miles up the creek here. There's a big spring that feeds that, so it's a steady flow of water. When they first started here, when they had the 5 families, they built a sawmill so they get the material to put this building up. And then they started on this building and took 4 years to put it up. And the stone all came from a local stone quarry. And when you consider that this was all hand done, you know, I mean, they didn't have all these big hoists and stuff. It's kind of hard to believe that they moved all this stuff in here like that. When they were grinding flour all the time, to begin with, they were grinding wheat. And they used to raise a lot of wheat up on the hills. And they claim they came a long ways, but I can't believe that they came too awful far because they were coming with oxen and horses, and you did not have these nice roads. It was down through the ditches and through the water and what have you to get here. And they couldn't, their wagons weren't that big, they couldn't haul that much in them. But they were bringing it here to sell it. When we went back and looked at the old ledger books, you could see in the fall of the year where they were going to the bank and borrowing money to buy wheat because they were grinding it or storing it, and then after a while they quit borrowing money and they started selling flour. And so you could just about follow it through by watching the bank accounts. Well, when they brought it in, down on the main floor, which is the third floor, they unloaded it into a hopper down there, and that's hooked on a scale. So they could weigh it, and they knew how much they were bringing in because they were bringing it here to sell. Once they weighed that, then they opened the door in the bottom of that hopper, and the grain would go clear to the bottom floor. Down there, there's a big holding bin down there, and there's a conveyor belt that runs all the way from the bottom floor to the top floor that has buckets on it that carries that grain way to the top. And then they could direct it where they wanted to go, if they wanted to put it in storage or if they wanted to grind it. If you look at the walls, you see there's plaster on the walls about 8 feet up or 6 feet. And that's because they were storing wheat up here. They always used to say that keep your nose to the grindstone. That's because that's how they could tell how to adjust their grinding stones, because they could smell that flour. If it was getting warm, they had it too close together, they'd have to separate it. And because once you got that flour too warm when you were grinding, that would kill the germ, and then it would not bleach out like it should. Once they ground it, they went up to the top floor and it got spread out where it got bleached and stuff. And nowadays they use a chemical to bleach flour, but in them days, if you just left flour alone, it will bleach itself. Down on the fourth floor, we have a machine down there. It's quite rare. It's one of the only ones like it in captivity. It's what they call a Midland purifier. It's really a complicated machine. It's got a shuttle auger in there. It's got a conveyor that runs at full length. It's got brushes that brush the coarse particle from the grain. And up on top it had a big blower that blew all the dust up to the top floor where it went into the dust room. And every so often they'd have to shut things down and bag up that dust that's in that room. It was no good for anything. They just bagged it up, and I'm quite sure it went over the hill. But that they didn't have as many inspectors walking around behind them at that time either, you know. But no, they had good housekeeping because they never had a fire here. And I don't know why, because they used kerosene lanterns a lot. And but they evidently were good housekeepers because they did not have a fire in here in all of them years. And it doesn't take much to blow that stuff up. That dust will blow up like gasoline. Well, when they were grinding flour 24 hours a day, they were grinding for the Union Army. And they shipped the flour overseas and all over. And they would take it down to 2 miles down here to the river, and then they would put it on a boat and a rail and ship it out. It's living history, and if we didn't preserve it, once it's gone, it can never be replaced.
Rochester artist Nicholas Poleschuk has a penchant for unusual canvases, eggshells. He meticulously carves elegant designs into the shells, transforming the eggs into beautiful works of art.
A
love carving eggshells because of the challenge they pose. The fact that I can put the detail I can onto something that's as delicate as an eggshell. I purchase my eggshells from all over the U.S. Here's a selection of the eggs I carve. This is a chicken egg. This is the emu, and that's one that's a layered shell. Here's kind of a surprising one. This is a goose egg shell. I'd say the one most fun to carve is the ostrich eggshell. At times is close to 3/16 of an inch thick, and with that depth can create quite a design. The primary tool I use is a high-speed engraver. Runs at about 300,000 RPM. It gives me the control I'm looking for to create the precision work that I do. It uses different size burrs. It cuts very cleanly, and as long as I don't rush it, I don't have to worry about breaking them. Carving the eggshell does take a tremendous amount of concentration, and I can't look away for a second because bad things happen. I have only one shot. I've got one eggshell, and the design I have has to be done on that eggshell. I guess the way I describe my artwork, it's a low relief sculpture on a rather unique material. I'm not sure how art galleries deal with the eggshells as far as a media. I have heard that there are some that don't view it as artwork, even though what it is art.
The people at Shepherd's Way Farms in Nerstrand raise sheep and produce cheese from their livestock. Shepherd's Way Farms believes the small, family-based farm still has a place in our society. They feel there's a way to live that combines hard work, creativity, and respect for the land.
somewhere back in our histories, I think maybe everyone was a shepherd.
I'm Jody Olson Reed, and I'm a cheesemaker. This is my husband, Stephen. He is our shepherd.
Shepherd's Way Farms is a dairy sheep cheesemaking operation that my wife and I and our 4 boys operate just outside of Nerstrand, Minnesota. The goal, of course, is you're taking sunshine, turning it into grass, turning it into milk, turning it into cheese. We started farming in the fall of 1994, and with a small flock of non-dairy sheep that we hoped would become dairy sheep. And we were in a very small rented property at that time.
I really like sheep milk cheese. There's something about the sheep milk that allows the cheese to develop a real depth of flavor. The quality of the milk is the most important thing in making a good cheese. So if you want an outstanding knock your socks off cheese, you have to have the best milk. As a cheesemaker, I love knowing what our sheep eat, how they live, what they're doing, and that the milk is coming right from the milking parlor into the milk room. That's more important than my abilities as a cheesemaker. I just have to not mess it up. Goat cheese has capric acid, which gives it that tangy flavor that we recognize in goat cheese. The sheep milk is by nature a little bit sweeter. It has more fat, more solids, so it has a potential to develop more complex flavors, more flavor. The sheep milk also has more calcium than cow or goat milk. Because it has more fat, it has more of the nutrients, vitamins that come with the fat, like vitamin A, for example.
It also has a higher proportion of HDL to LDL, so the cholesterol is better for you.
We sell our cheese in a lot of different ways. Direct to customers at farmers markets. Most of our focus is local, so you can find our cheese at co-ops and bigger specialty grocery stores, specialty cheese shops, restaurants. We're very fortunate to have quite a few chefs that like to use our cheese. And then we also have our cheese in a variety of segments of the country. San Francisco, DC, Chicago, Boston.
Holy cats, do we get feedback. You know, one of the great things about the farmers markets, of course, is you're seeing thousands of people every weekend. We do 3, 4, 5 farmers markets, so you're getting instant feedback, you know, hundreds of times a day.
My favorite are usually the blue cheese people, that you can have a spread of cheese and they walk up and they zero in on the blue cheese, and the look on their face and the sound they make when they eat that cheese, that is the best compliment.
We make one of the best blue cheeses in America. It's placed top in its class multiple times at the American Cheese Society. It's written up in all the fancy magazines. We don't use steroids, hormones, insecticides, pesticides. What we do and what we believe in is trying to keep a more balanced, healthy approach to how we raise our animals, how we care for our animals.
We work hard to be good stewards of the land and make decisions for the farm and for the animals that also benefits the environment, and we want to put as much back in as we get from the animals. People are really seeking out in the cheese world the same thing they're looking for in the vegetable and meats, where they want to know how it's made, who's making it, that special care is being given to it rather than being mass-produced anonymously.
And I always make the point that people intellectually understand that local doesn't necessarily equate to geography. You know, if I'm visiting a customer in Providence, Rhode Island, or Seattle, Washington, and I say, my name is Stephen Reed, my wife and I make cheese in Minnesota, you know, would like to try it. Oh, I love buying local. You know, they've equated that term local with knowing where their food is coming from. In January of 2005, we had an arson fire that destroyed all of our barns and over 600 animals. And it was really a devastating, obviously, experience. And it really, you know, could have been the end of Shepherd's Way Farms. And we made the decision almost immediately that, no, this is just another trial, and but that we were not going to give up. And the community, you know, really stepped up. It was in many ways a tremendously powerful experience in terms of bringing our family closer together. I think it's tremendously valuable what we do, even if we're not going to get rich doing it. I mean, I feel that this is something that has to be done, but it's hard work, you know, I mean, it's hard work. Like when I wake up in the morning, like this morning, and I'm walking out to the barn, and I look off to the northeast and I see the sheep in that morning sun on the hillside grazing. It's like, man, that moment is what makes this the greatest job, you know, in the world.
The St. Augustine Church in Austin was built in 1896. Almost a century later, that building suffered a fire that nearly consumed it. Thankfully, it survived and was restored for everyone to enjoy. That's all for this episode. If you enjoy programs like Off 90, please show your support by becoming a member of KSMQ Public Television. Keep local programming vibrant in southern Minnesota. Give us a call at 507-481-2095 or 1-800-658-2539 or sign up online at ksmq.org. Thanks for watching. Join us next time, Off 90.
Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.